Andy Kotelnicki's offense and Tom Allen's defense still haven't even hit their highest potential yet.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show, and help me welcome a special guest from Pro Football Focus, the co-host of the PFF College Football Show and PFF analyst, Dalton Wasserman, is going to help us break down Penn State versus USC further and talk about the biggest takeaways from Penn State's victory as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Dalton, we have plenty to cover because I don't think we've seen the best of Penn State's offense and defense to this point, even though they've done very well through these 6 games. Talking about key performances, but also the ones that were a little disappointing. Drew Aller and Tyler Warren did exceptional, but other players that stood out for maybe the right or wrong reasons. And then who's been better, Andy Kotelnicki or Tom Allen to this point, with the USC game included? Dalton, I'm going to start by saying this, and I've already said it. I think that Penn State's offense and defense have not peaked to this point. I think they still can get better because these are new systems. The players, the coaches are still getting adjusted with one another. What works, what doesn't. You're also seeing it against better competition. And I think there's that overall confidence like, okay, we can run this system and we can do it against quality opponents as well, because doing it against Kent State's one thing, but then winning on the road like that against USC is another.
Yeah, no, I agree. First, I'll start with the USC win. Look, USC, even though they're 3-3, that's a really tough football team with a defense that's a lot better than last year and a really good quarterback in Miller Moss. And one of the things that we've noticed with all the conference realignment now is that those big cross-country trips have been giving a lot of teams problems. Penn State is not the only team that's gone out and played a close game or even lost when they make these cross-country trips. It's one of the few wins that's been made in the Big Ten with a coast-to-coast trip. So I think just getting out of there with a win, regardless of the score, going to overtime or anything, is a huge win that sets them up for the stretch run now, because they're not making another West Coast trip. That's the good news, right? What you have, I think, with Penn State that I would like to see on both sides of the ball is to just get off to better starts in these games, right? I think we saw against Bowling Green even where they struggled early against USC, down 20-6 at halftime. A little bit of a struggle offensively early with a team like UCLA. I think if they get off to better starts, they can really start getting in their wheelhouse. Even against Illinois, they were down early against Illinois. It's just kind of a theme right now where they kind of work their way, and it's great to be able to adjust. I think it's a great thing to be able to do in the second half of games and win ball games and just find a way to win. But if they can get it rolling now in the first quarter, that's kind of the one theme that I see with Penn State, is just these slow starts where it feels like, okay, Penn State has all this talent. Why are they not dominating? Well, if you're going to dominate, you have to do it for 60 minutes, and it really starts right at the top. So I think if they start getting everything off to just a better start, right, get the run game going a little bit earlier, get Drew in a rhythm a little bit earlier, then I think you start talking about, okay, Penn State can be dominant. Because I think you're right. They're not firing on all cylinders. There's stretches of games where they are, but not for 60 minutes.
And I think that has to do with familiarity. It's about getting into rhythm, as you mentioned, getting situated. And it's not like these guys have been running. I mean, Andy Kotelnicki's system is clearly, yes, we know it's better, but it's also, it's unique. It's very different from what they ran with Mike Yursic's group a season ago. And then on top of that, Manny Diaz's defense, there's still nuances that are there. Tom Allen didn't just scrap everything. He kept elements of Manny Diaz's defense, but he also is his own coach. He has his own playbook. Penn State switched to a 4-2-5. So I am not slightly shocked that Penn State is more of a second half team, because all of the talent is there. You have the experienced players and the star power as well. But I agree with you. The slow starts are definitely a problem. I think they will get fixed because the bye week couldn't have come at a better time. The second bye week for Penn State. I think that's where you fix these minuscule things. I also look at it and say that as you just have more tape, as you have more film, you have more results, you can look back and say, okay, hey, let's work on this and keep doing what we were doing against Illinois, or let's scrap that game and take away the good from the USC game, right? They have more results to pick from to say, okay, this is what we're doing right, and we got to forget about this. We can't run this again.
Absolutely. It's always harder to get better after wins. And it's realizing the ultimate long-term goal is to be playing your best football in November and December and making the playoff, right? And you feel like, okay, you look at Penn State's talent, you look at their schedule, and you look at how well-rounded they are when they are playing like that. This should be a playoff team. That's the ultimate goal. If they're playing their best football, and we've seen this in past years where Penn State plays their best football in weeks 1 through 4, and then it peters off, right? We kind of saw that last year too. If they can keep improving through these wins, and I think this bye week is huge, just coming off what's by far the longest trip of their season, right? I mean, everything about this bye week is well timed. You're absolutely right, and it's just about continuing to get more and more in the system, and not even just more in the system. I mean, Andy's always drawing up something on offense. Obviously, we saw Tyler Warren playing center and catching a touchdown, right? He's one of the most creative offensive minds in college football right now. Even at Kansas, he was just an incredible play caller, and he even knows when he has spots where there isn't elite talent, he knows how to get that talent to punch above his weight class, and he uses every bit of depth and width on the field to attack every part of the field. So they're still coming together, and the fact that they're 6-0 and they're still winning ball games and tough ball games at times where there is adversity, it is big time, because that adversity is going to come in future big games, possibly even the Ohio State game, right? That's going to be a lot of adversity. It's the toughest game of the year every year. So I think the fact that they're not playing their best football yet, there's some teams where you watch them early in the year and you go, like it's not going to happen. I've seen this with like Missouri, where it's like they're just not executing. I don't think Penn State's not executing.
Right.
There's just more to come. I think there is more on the ceiling of this. They do just have to work it behind the scenes and get there.
And Drew Aller being still relative. I mean, he is a junior, but he's a young quarterback. This is only his second season of starting, so everything kind of starts in, I mean, it definitely, because quarterback's the most important position, Dalton. You understand that, a lot of people do as well, that it starts and ends with Drew Aller. And the better that Drew Aller gets, the more comfortable that he gets, the better this Penn State team is going to get. Dalton, let's finish up with this segment and then move to Drew Aller specifically, Tyler Warren, some other key players. I think that's a good tidbit to almost segue into that second part of the conversation. But when we look at this group, okay, addressing slow starts, that's pretty straightforward. But what about something in between the lines here for Penn State? Is it maybe the offensive line? Because the running game wasn't great. It wasn't great, and I know Nicholas Singleton's not 100%. Katron Allen certainly hasn't looked his best. But against that USC front that's banged up, missing key players like an Eric Gentry that are very talented against the run, and I thought that the Nittany Lions would have a lot more success and wouldn't need Drew Aller to throw for nearly 400 yards. I thought the offensive line and the ground game would be able to have a sustainable day. They were able to move down the football field bits and bits and bits, but they didn't have the explosive plays that I was anticipating. So offensive line, ground game, pass rush was a little lackluster against USC as well. What are those things that they can improve in this bye week based on the USC game in your mind?
So I think offensively, you have an offensive line that's very young in its own right? You lost, at least 3 starters from last year.
Yes.
Three guys that got drafted in the NFL, very good players, obviously, Olu at left tackle. You have an offensive line that's still gelling and still coming together as the season goes on. And the run game is intriguing to me because their run blocking grades for us are getting just gradually increasingly better each week, right? Like they're not slamming people up front, but it's getting a little bit better each week. And that's going to be the key, I think, for this offense moving forward, is just, can we get a little bit more piece by piece out of this offensive line, especially as you get into seeing these tough Big Ten fronts, right? And hopefully peaking for you guys, at the Ohio State game. That's the big one. And they just, it's coming together. Like there's pieces to me when you talk about the O-line, and everyone talks about the receiving core in the offseason, and that's, rightfully so. They struggled so much last year, but that's the funny part, is you still have a team that's figuring a lot of things out and a lot of fundamental things out, right? So I think the offensive line is a big key for the second half of this season. Can they continue that gradual improvement? And I thought defensively against USC, I thought early in the game they kind of had some issues playing in space, and those USC runs a lot of misdirection. They know how to get their guys in space. They're not the most physical team, right? But they were kind of chasing. They caught Penn State chasing, and then the adjustments were made. I think it was just, they stopped the run better, first of all. That definitely got off. It was way better. I think it was 11 or 13 yards to carry, something crazy in the first half. and then they shut it down and got it down, I believe, under 4 yards a carry in the second half. So just better gap discipline in the run game. And I thought they just did a better job of containing USC's athletes in space. Defensively, they have all the talent. I just think for me, there's sometimes I would run a bit more zone coverage. I don't think, especially with Kevin Winston now done for the season, right? I think there's times when Manny Diaz would do it last year, but he would blitz a lot with it. And Tom Allen will go through stretches where I think there's times where maybe the man-to-man coverage doesn't work so well for them because they're not elite at corner, and without Kevin Winston on the back end now, not necessarily elite in the secondary at all. It's a good secondary, but it's not one that I would put maybe in the top 5 in the country, right? I think a little more zone coverage where guys can see the football and get their eyes on it and chase it. That's a little bit better for them, right? That's just me. I think especially was it the Bowling Green game, I think it was, when they were struggling to contain Harold Fann in their passing game. Yeah. All of a sudden they went to more too high and more zone coverages, and it was lights out. I think just mixing it up a little more in coverage. But I think, honestly, it's just a matter of, again, not waiting for halftime to make those adjustments, right? Because we've seen even the defense get off the slow starts. And when if they're covering well and this pass rush is on, good luck, because we know they can be a top 5 defense in the country.
Signature game for Drew Aller, signature game for Tyler Warren, but there's more to it than just that. Dalton and I will talk about it on the other side of this break. All right, Nittany Lion fans, it is time for our Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy actually lets you choose the specific athlete that you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, you'll get exclusive content after the season from those players, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create that content, you get your money back. And this week, I'm choosing Tyler Warren. Could it be any more obvious? 17 catches, 224 yards, catching a touchdown after snapping the ball to Drew Aller as the center. Tyler Warren is easily the Roy Player of the Week, and I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy, and you can join me too by making a payment as little as $10 on Roy if you'd like to contribute. And Roy is also doing their part to bring fans closer to the game and their schools with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November, and to enter, all you got to do is download the Roy app in the App Store or Google Play, use promo code LOCKEDON when you're signing up, and you're entered in. If you're already on Roy, you can make a payment to any athlete's campaign and you'll be automatically entered. There's no purchase necessary and void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for the official rules. You can download Roy, try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. Again, that's Roy. And PFF has got you covered all season long with the best data, tools, and analysis in the game. Sign up for PFF Plus today to unlock all of their famous player grades and premium stats. Push to the playoffs in your fantasy league with in-season tools and award-winning rankings from fantasy experts. And stay connected to the next generation of talent with the best NFL draft coverage on the planet. No matter what you're looking for, PFF Plus has what you need to make winning decisions all season long. You can sign up for PFF Plus today for less than $10 per month. And that's where Dalton is from. He is the co-host of the PFF's college football show. And we'll talk about Drew Aller now, Tyler Warren, and some other performances that stood out for better or for worse. Aller's going to stand out because he nearly threw for 400 yards. He had over 400 total yards. There were the 3 interceptions in there, 2 of them that could have been a little more costly, but 2 of them that had consequences associated with them, not the one at the end of regulation in my mind. Everyone says that this was the breakout game for Aller. This is the game that he grew up in. And I say, okay, I understand the reasoning behind that. I understand that assessment. But Dalton, this game by Drew Aller does not happen if he didn't grow up beforehand. I think that maturity period was in the offseason. And we saw that against West Virginia with that swagger, that confidence, the stiff arm, right? That was where it was kind of all capsulated together. That was really the tip of the iceberg that we saw, like, hey, this is the new look Drew Aller. So the offseason is where he matured. And now you're seeing it actually come to fruition in a game like USC, because he never had a game-winning drive like that, or a game-tying drive. He was never in one of those. Yes, you can look at Ohio State and Michigan. Well, he had to play from behind, but it wasn't one of those game on the line. You either make mistakes or you can pull Penn State from behind and win this game, or at least tie it and set them up to win that. And Drew Aller had never been in that moment, and he aced the test.
Absolutely. It was a huge moment that fourth quarter for Drew Aller, and to finish a big comeback, right? And that wasn't just, we were down 3 and we needed one score. They were down 20-6 at half, obviously. They needed a big comeback. They needed plays from everybody. But Aller was spectacular in the fourth quarter. And look, the confidence part first, to me, also comes from, look, it's an offense that gives a quarterback a lot of confidence. We saw it with Kotelnicki at Kansas, and you have guys running some wide open windows. It's a fun offense to run with so many different personnel groups and formations and everything Andy throws at you. But in that moment, those last, 6-7 minutes, it wasn't any tricks. It wasn't any gimmicks. Right. It wasn't anything. It was Drew Aller, go win the ball game. And obviously they probably had enough time where they could have ran it a couple of times and, whatever. But it was about – this was now the moment. This was the moment where it's like, okay, like you mentioned, I think the only time maybe I sort of saw one was against Indiana last year, but that Indiana team last year was obviously nothing like this year. Yeah. This was a time on the road in the Coliseum, West Coast trip, big game, a game that honestly, when you think about it, could decide the difference. That could be the difference between making the playoff and not, right? Every loss matters here. You get to 2 losses and you get in kind of that gray area.
Yes.
I think Aller keeping his cool, especially the 2 fourth down plays. I think did they both go to Julian Fleming? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and Fleming, props to him, making probably the 2 biggest catches of his career, because obviously he struggled at Ohio State. Now he's trying to figure out here. But Aller, you're exactly right. It's that moment that you're looking for. Can we trust Aller more if it's the same thing in the next game against Wisconsin, if it's against Ohio State, if it's against somebody in the playoff, let's say, if it's the Big Ten title game? Can we trust him with that one drive? Because I think what we'd seen through the first 5.5 games is, okay, clearly he can run Andy's system and he's more confident and comfortable, and we can get in the run game and the play action. We can certainly throw the ball down the seam, and Tyler Warren's always open, but that's a moment. There comes moments where it's about your quarterback. And in that game, at the very, very end of it, at least, Drew Aller was a better quarterback on the field, and it should make Andy and James Franklin and everybody feel a lot better about him in those situations going forward.
And the mistakes, the turnovers I saw short-term memory. They didn't affect him when it mattered most, because in those other games at Ohio State, against a Michigan, where even if he wasn't making big egregious interceptions, it's like, okay, another 3 and out, another 3 and out, another 3 and out. And those things would just kind of just add up. They would pile up and eventually weigh him down in the most important parts of the game, where you weren't out of it, but it was certainly an uphill battle at that point. And that uphill battle became a lot steeper. Not in this case. I saw no lingering effects because those interceptions could have been costly. The defense played complimentary football and held USC to field goals when they had plus territory. And Drew Aller said, you know what? I'm not going to let it bother me. I think all of that together. And like you had mentioned, Drew being able to not just confidently run the offense, but that drive was on him. Like, he quarterbacked that team down the football field. It wasn't screen passes, trick plays, dink and dunk, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen getting 4 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards. No, that was Drew making plays, extending plays with his legs, shedding off a sack, and finding the open receiver, and a guy that he wasn't in rhythm with. And that's when I talk about and say, hey, like, the better days are ahead for Penn State's offense and defense. Fleming and Aller have not been on the same page, Dalton, and he went to him twice on the biggest play, those 2 big 4th downs, the biggest plays of the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what it does, even more so than just the fourth quarter situations, right? It opens up more options even earlier in the game, right? You talk about first, last 2 minutes of the first half can be the same exact thing. Those are on him. And I think even times, let's just say there's times now that come where maybe we're not getting the run game and the play action going and some of the stuff in Andy's system. Maybe there's a moment here where we have to go, you know what, let's run no huddle for a drive or 2 and let's just let him do it. I think it opens up more options even than just end of game, okay, 1 score. Like, the more you can trust your quarterback in those spots, honestly, the more you can trust him in all 60 minutes. Maybe that's an answer for the slow starts. Maybe you get a game soon here where, they come out on the first drive and they run no huddle, and maybe they let Aller throw it 8 out of the 10 plays, right? I think it opens up options when you see a guy do that. And you mentioned, I love what you mentioned about getting through adversity, right? They always talk about championship drives and Heisman drives and things like that, but that's really what that's in a broader scope. Getting through that sort of adversity, they absolutely at a halftime they could have rolled over and laid down. Absolutely, they could have. And Tyler Warren bringing them back in at first. The run game gets going. Drew Aller gets going in the fourth quarter. I think working through that adversity, not only does it make you better and get you a win, but it brings you together as a team, right? And I think there's times in past years in really hard moments where it looked like Penn State was kind of disjointed, right? And it was like, okay, here we go again. We're playing Michigan or Ohio State again, and things are hard, and they're just going to stay hard. Like, you have to punch through it. And even look, USC, I got to be honest with you, that's probably the best 3-3 team in the country. They're really good. All their losses have been really tight. They know how to play in tight games. They've been through that. They've been through adversity. They beat LSU, who's a top 10 team now. Like, USC is a really good football team that just doesn't have the best record. To do that on the road against a team like that through that adversity, I think is huge for them, for Penn State, and the way the rest of their season could go. It's a huge moment.
Ball bounces a couple different ways in those close USC games because they only lost by 3 to Michigan. They lost by 7 to Minnesota. I think it's still inexcusable to lose to that Minnesota team. However, it was on the road. Not an ideal matchup for USC, but completely agree that they would have been 26th in the AP poll because they were still receiving votes. They just had the 2 losses, and Michigan was down there. Drew Aller finishing with a grade of 76.6 against USC per PFF. Tyler Warren, best player overall. That doesn't need to be said, but the PFF grade was a 91.3. And then, of course, to go along with it, 17 catches, 224 yards, nearly broke the single game receiving yards record held by Jahan Dotson with 242. And he had that one touchdown where he lined up at center and ran a streak down the middle of the field and winning a jump ball in contested coverage as well. Tyler Warren, I think it's not. I mean, Dalton, it's getting past to the point where it's just about, he's a serious contender for the John Mackey Award. He should be one of the first tight ends taken in next year's NFL draft. The versatility for him to be a quarterback, a running back, to line up at center and snap the ball and then beat the coverage and win a jump ball. I said in the previous show that the only other player with that kind of versatility, like the conversation now says, who's the most versatile player in football overall? Not just being, he's the most complete tight end. That's what James Franklin says. But how about the most versatile player in football? This conversation belongs to him and Travis Hunter. I think that's where Tyler Warren is at this point with what he does for this Penn State offense.
You're kind of right. I mean, honestly, I even joked with my co-host Max Chadwick the other day, and I said, you know what? If they had to line him up at linebacker next week, I bet he'd be just fine. So yeah. I mean, you just get guys. There's a handful of guys throughout the country like Tyler Warren who they're just great football players. That there's something about them where they can just do anything for you. If you ask them to block every play, they'll do it just fine. If you give them the ball every play, they'll do fine. If you put them on special teams, they'll be just fine. He's just such a great, well-rounded football player. And with a guy, you can tell, as I believe, was he a quarterback in high school? Is that right? I think he was, right? You can tell the football IQ, right? Because to do that number of different things, even mentally, there's not that many players with the ability to do that, especially in an offense like this one. So when you're the centerpiece of an offense like Andy Kotelnicki's, the amount of stuff that you have to know and the amount of formations and shifts and where to line up, and then we're putting him in center and he's catching touchdowns. I mean, the combination of physical ability and football IQ is what's gonna have this guy being a good NFL player, right? And right now, you mentioned the Mackey Award. To me, there's only 2 guys right now that could win the Mackey. It's him or it's Harold Fannin from Bowling Green. And I get it with Warren because you're doing even more versatile things and all the other stuff you're talking about. I think easily those are the 2 best tight ends in the country. And then you talk about the draft, you throw in Colston Loveland from Michigan. Right. I have to think Tyler Warren's putting himself at least on a day 2 radar with just the number of things he's doing. Because even if, let's say, he doesn't go to the NFL and, pull off Travis Kelce numbers and 1,300 yards or whatever, having a guy with the ability to do that many things on a football field, just to be a constant flexible weapon, those positionless weapons that teams' offensive coaches are looking for now. That's what Penn State has in him now, because it's just how many different ways can we get Tyler Warren the football, and it's working. He's been their best offensive player by far, and I think he's one of the 2 or 3 best tight ends in the country.
Drew Aller, Tyler Warren proved to be massive difference makers for Penn State against USC. So reserved for the other side of this break, we'll talk about some of the other players that stood out for maybe not necessarily the right reasons and address that debate. Andy Kotelnicki or Tom Allen, who's been better for Penn State this season? I know what everyone's going to say, but I think the discussion's a little bit closer than people might anticipate. We'll discuss that on the other side of this break. And today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient, it's that simple, all in one place, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes. Your first $5 bet to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com. And if you look over on FanDuel, so the lines have not been released for Penn State versus Wisconsin, but if you want to make some wagers on the Penn State Nittany Lions, you can bet them to win the conference with odds at plus 360, to win the 2025 college football playoff championship game plus 1200. If you're looking to make a bet on the Heisman, Drew Aller has the 8th best odds at plus 2500. You can bet on Drew Aller to win the Heisman at plus 2500. If you like those lines, just visit FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And remember, you can sign up for PFF Plus today for less than $10 per month. You'll get the best data, tools, and analysis in the game, and also you'll get some help with your fantasy leagues too. In this final segment, we're going to talk about Kotelnicki versus Tom Allen, but also get back to the player grades from Penn State versus USC first. Nicholas Singleton did not have the best game. He still played a pretty decent amount of snaps, splitting the work with Katron Allen. I think as a whole, just Dalton, when you look at the running game, Singleton and Allen did not look their best, obviously, and USC doesn't have the best run defense to go along with it. Specifically with Singleton, though, I'd like to chalk that up to the fact that maybe this injury is a little more serious. He can play through it, but it's something that's holding him back to this point. Did you see something that maybe we're all missing?
Yeah, he did look a little bit less explosive, right? And I know holding him out of the UCLA game, James Franklin said, if he had to play, he could play, but I'm going to hold him out for this one. I think what you see, he's the more explosive of the two backs, yes. But he didn't look it in this game. Just 10 carries for 26 yards, didn't break a single tackle. There was just that little bit of extra juice that we saw in the earlier games. It was just kind of missing a little bit, right? And I think I think his explosiveness on the ground is actually the biggest factor in their run game of what can make them great in the run game. Because Allen is good and he gets those tough runs between the tackles, but Singleton's the guy who can hit home runs, right? But he didn't look like he could hit home runs against USC. I do think the bye week is coming at the right time for him, right? Because I think you could argue, to keep this offense balanced, that he's their most important player going forward, right? Obviously, again, Allen is physical. Tyler Warren's great. Drew Aller's throwing the ball well. But Nick Singleton giving you that explosive element on the ground and making safeties come into the box and respect the run game, I think that's a big, big key, right? So this week off should be big for him. If he can regain just that top-end speed, the explosiveness, I think you've really got something with the two-headed backfield and the way the passing game is coming along.
And yeah, so that helps balance out the offense so that it can't be completely one-sided for the defense. You either have to run a balanced defense to game plan for both the rush attack and the pass attack. You can't sell out for one, and that's what Singleton can do. And that's why Andy Kotelnicki was brought in, to get that explosiveness. I look to guys like Singleton, Amari Evans in the passing game, if they're really going to make sure that explosiveness is key down the stretch for their offensive game plan. I do want to flip it over to the defense, because Penn State's defense did surrender 30 points. USC started some drives in plus territory, great stops by the defense to limit them from that really getting out of hand at times. But just some players that I really didn't think had the best of days, especially given the battle. Dennis Sutton, I said, I honestly thought he looked lost at times, just kind of trailing the play and seemed not to have the biggest impact. Abdul Carter was Penn State's best overall defender, was really good in coverage, but was able to disrupt some plays at the line of scrimmage as well, even though he didn't have the best overall pass rushing day. And Tony Rojas too. For a game where Penn State's run defense really could have showed up, Tony Rojas and Dennis Sutton were I wouldn't say a little. They were disappointing to me against that USC team.
Yeah, I think those two guys, it's kind of representative to me of some of the struggles that I saw them have as a team on Saturday. And I think there's two things. One is eye discipline. I think the USC, it's a hard offense to to maneuver because you've got a team. Lincoln Riley knows how to get people moving and put people in conflict, right? There's a lot of misdirection, a lot of the RPO stuff. There's a lot of screens. There's a lot of play action going into screens. It's an offense when you're playing against it that takes so much eye discipline, right? And I think there were times, especially in the first half, where they did get a little bit lost. I thought team-wide, it was a thing where it felt like USC was a step ahead, more so than physically getting beat or run over or shaken out of their shoes. I thought it was just a thing where Lincoln Riley was a step ahead in the first half of that game, and I thought that was represented. You could see it, the eye discipline and the just watching. A lot of times you get caught up watching in the backfield, and then it's going the other way, and their athletes are in space, and you have a problem, right? So I think that was the first thing that stood out. And then as far as Dennis Sutton goes, look, I think Miller Moss gets rid of the ball very, very quickly. USC knew that they had a disadvantage when it came to Penn State rushing the passer and their offensive line that's been struggling lately to pass protect, right? So Miller Moss gets rid of the ball quickly, and Penn State had their lowest pass rush grade for us as a team this season against USC. Yeah. So I think there is a combination of they got the run game going, which gets a D-line on their heels. All the misdirection from Lincoln Riley has a defense on their heels. And then Miller Moss is very good at getting the ball out quickly and getting it out right as or right before he gets hit. So there was a combination of things. I thought Lincoln Riley for the first 3 quarters of it called a great game. I really do. I think the biggest part of the first half of that game was his play calling and getting his athletes in space. And you could see it. Penn State was on their heels. The pass rush, it was the one thing I thought would win this game for Penn State. And it was a non-factor. I wouldn't expect that to be a trend going forward because they have so much talent, right? When you have Dennis Sutton, you have Carter, you have Zane Durant on the inside, who's actually your highest rated player right now for the season. There's so much talent on that D-line. It's not something I would worry about. I think it's more just Lincoln Riley had a very good plan to deal with those guys and to get his athletes in space.
We'll finish up with this debate briefly. Andy Kotelnicki versus Tom Allen. Dalton, I think you and I agree. We already addressed it off the recording that we believe that, yes, Andy Kotelnicki does have a slight edge on Tom Allen. And that's what everybody's going to say, I think mostly because of the perception, right, that the offense was so putrid a season ago and did not meet any expectations, that Andy Kotelnicki bringing it to a group that's well-respected in top 10 and in different categories when it comes to offensively in the nation. But Tom Allen's group is right there as well, and if not better in other categories when you compare. So a yards per play for Penn State on offense versus a yards per play allowed defensively. Like Tom Allen's defense is actually better in those comparable categories compared to Andy Kotelnicki, but I think the value that Kotelnicki has brought gives him the edge in this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's generally thought that Tom Allen has more to work with, right? When you talk about guys like Abdul Carter and Dennis Sutton, some other superstars, I think when you look at Andy, for me, he might even be the favorite for the Broyles Award now when you're talking about top assistant coach in college football. And again, it's some of the similar stuff that he did at Kansas, getting players that maybe aren't elite talents to punch above their weight class, right? Kansas last year, I can't say they had a single NFL receiver on their team, and they were 3rd in the country in receiving grade for us. Right. And it is a fun argument because you've got a team who Penn State is 6th in the country for us in both offensive and defensive grade. They're playing equally well, right, on both sides. You just mentioned it's a lot closer, but I think what Andy's done in getting Drew's confidence going, getting the run game going with Singleton and Allen with a little more diversity, right? I think last year, too, in the run game, you didn't see a whole lot of diversity in the run game. It was very straight ahead. It was very Big Ten, right? And I love what he does with with Kansas, it's very spread out, right? It's Big 12 football. You have all these receivers and small guys and guys who play in space. He's brought a similar element, but he does it with bigger personnel, with Big Ten personnel. Yeah. And I love the way he paces it. They run more motion than any team in the country, and that was a problem last year. Penn State really didn't do that. Kotelnicki runs more motion than any coordinator in the country. There's just so many things that he's tied with the personnel and just made it work. Like somebody like Tyler Warren, right? He's never done that with an elite tight end. So he never had an elite tight end like that at Kansas. This is just what he does. He makes adjustments, and he gets creative and does all that. The one argument I'll make for Tom Allen, and I had to look this up before we did this. I mentioned about Penn State making second half adjustments, all right? Penn State is in the second half of games. Penn State is 2nd in our grades for defensive grade, and they're 3rd in EPA per play allowed. So I think that's a big thing. Another thing, if the defense especially can ever start getting off to good starts, they're going to be lights out because he's making the adjustments. He's seeing it at halftime. Obviously, he's been a defensive coach for a long time. He was a head coach for a long time. You're getting a guy who's making halftime adjustments and shutting people down in the second half. But I still have to give the edge to Andy just because of what he's brought. And you mentioned it, the level of improvement. This is the Penn State team they thought they were getting, and they're not even firing on all cylinders yet.
I know, and I think that brings our conversation full circle, how we started with the fact that they're not even peaking yet. The better days are ahead for both the offense and the defense. And for what it's worth, you mentioned that they're both tied. They're 6th overall in offense and defense per PFF, but Penn State's defense does have the higher overall grade, 91.5, compared to that offensive grade of 88.6. So I want people to understand that Tom Allen's defense is right there with Andy Kotelnicki's offense, but when you compare it to 2023, Andy Kotelnicki has obviously resurrected what Penn State's offense could and now is in the present. He is Dalton Wasserman from Pro Football Focus, co-host of the Pro Football Focus College Football Show. All of his platforms and links will be down in the description. I encourage you to go check them out. Dalton, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate the perspective and the analysis of Penn State after this USC game.
Thank you for having me on, Zach. I really appreciate it.